Hello. As you've heard, my name is Harriet Schleifer. I'm a member of AJC's Executive Council and chair of Project Interchange, an educational institute of AJC that brings world leaders to Israel. As a fellow resident of Chappaqua, New York, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce our next speaker and my neighbor, former Secretary of State, Hillary Rodham Clinton. Over the past 2 days, we've witnessed AJC's global reach. Leaders from Cyprus to Singapore, France to Israel, and many more countries across the globe have discussed the impact of AJC's global Jewish advocacy. Unique relationships between leaders with shared values, as well as our staunch, nonpartisan outlook, help advance AJC's mission. In our time, few American leaders have been as well known, both domestically and internationally, as Hillary Clinton. Today, we have the honor of hearing Secretary Clinton's vision for the future. Secretary Clinton has addressed the AJC Global Forum on 3 previous occasions: as First Lady, as Senator, as Secretary of State, and now for her 4th appearance as grandmother-to-be. Throughout her political career, Secretary Clinton has staunchly defended Israel's right to live in peace and security alongside its neighbors, unequivocally denouncing terrorism and extremism of all forms. When discussing Iran, Secretary Clinton has repeatedly asserted that the Iranian regime must be fully transparent and that attempts to deceive the global community will not be tolerated. Today, Israeli-Palestinian peace talks are at a precarious juncture. Reports from Ukraine are increasingly troubling. Negotiations with Iran have yet to produce a permanent agreement. Anti-Semitism has reared its ugly head in Europe and beyond. In these unsettling times, with an eye towards the future direction of American stewardship, we have invited a world-renowned figure to share her thoughts on not only America's challenges, but also our opportunities on the world stage. This morning, we are honored to host a dedicated leader and longtime friend of AJC. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Secretary Hillary Clinton.
Good morning. Thank you. Thank you so very much. And I want to thank Harriet for that introduction. As David Harris said, we share the common trait of living in Chappaqua, New York, and somebody else does as well. And I am so pleased to be here with you and to be able to address you on some of the issues facing us. I want to thank Stanley Bergman and everyone at AJC. I have a lot of friends and former colleagues here, and I want to recognize and thank all of them, too. It is a great honor for me to have this opportunity, and as I was coming on stage, I saw my friend, your next speaker, the Canadian Foreign Minister, John Baird. I'm really warming up the crowd for John. He and I had a great time working together on the important issues within the context of the very strong relationship between Canada and the United States. I also know you've heard in the last 2 days from an impressive roster of leaders. The program listed the French foreign minister, another close partner of mine. Minister Fabius has been a great colleague in working on many challenges. Foreign Minister Shanmugam of Singapore, who I think had a great opportunity to connect the success of Singapore with the success of Israel. The Foreign Minister of Cyprus, the Israeli Minister of Strategic and Intelligence Affairs, just met with the Deputy Mayor of Jerusalem, a young woman with a lot of great ideas representing her generation of Israelis. And of course, Senator McCain, Chief of Staff Dennis McDonough, and so many others. Quite a list, as David was saying, drawn here as a testament to the indispensable role that this organization plays. Just yesterday, we were reminded again how much the world needs AJC. The new global survey, sponsored by the Anti-Defamation League, found that more than a quarter of all adults around the world hold some form of anti-Semitic attitudes, and nearly 1/2 have never heard of the Holocaust. In such a landscape, scarred by ignorance and bigotry, we need the clear moral voice of the American Jewish Committee. So thank you for working so hard around the world on behalf of tolerance and justice. Now, being here with you, though, I have to confess, is a welcome change of pace for me. As you may have heard, I recently finished a new book after many months holed up in my study on the 3rd floor of our old farmhouse in Chappaqua, writing and rewriting some more. So it's nice being out of my attic and being here in support of all of you. The book is about my experiences at the State Department, our rapidly changing and increasingly interdependent world, and the challenges facing our country and that world in the 21st century, from the middle class to the Middle East. A light summer read that I'm sure will be great at the beach. Now, along the way, I considered a number of possible titles. About a year ago, the Washington Post asked its readers to send in suggestions for me. My personal favorite was The Scrunchy Chronicles, 112 countries, and it's still all about my hair. I thought that was a real keeper. But in the end, I call the book Hard Choices because I felt that pretty well described my experiences on the high wire of international diplomacy and what it takes to protect America, our interests, and our allies in a dangerous world. Making policy at the highest levels is always a balancing act with an endless set of tough calls, many of which come with imperfect information and conflicting imperatives. There are always choices that we later regret, consequences we do not foresee, alternative paths we wish we had taken, but hopefully we get it more right than wrong if we stay true to our values, stand by our friends, and uphold the best traditions of our bold and generous nation. Today, I want to reflect on a few of the hard choices that confronted the United States during the first 4 years of the Obama administration, and offer for your consideration a few lessons that may help frame the future choices facing us, our partners, and our competitors around the world. I'll start with Iran, because we are arriving at a crucial juncture. The clock is ticking on difficult negotiations to reach a comprehensive, enforceable agreement that puts nuclear weapons out of Iran's reach and protects Israel and others in that quite dangerous neighborhood. The progress of Iran's nuclear program may be halted, but it is not dismantled. And Tehran has not yet lived up to its obligations or answered the concerns of the international community. So the choices made in the coming months will be crucial. How did we get here to this point? When President Obama asked me to serve as Secretary of State back in late 2008, many observers argued that Iran was on the rise in the Middle East. The invasion of Iraq had removed its nemesis, Saddam Hussein. Hezbollah, its proxy and agent, was in Lebanon, threatening Israel. Hamas, stationed in Damascus, but closely in partnership with Iran, was in Gaza. Iran enjoyed booming oil exports, giving it the cash to fund global terrorist proxies and build up its military while also building its nuclear program. With the international community divided, there was little standing in the way of Iran's march toward nuclear weapons capability. Faced with this inheritance, President Obama and I knew we had a hard choice. Keep reading from the same old playbook, politically safe, but practically unsustainable, or tear up the old playbook and devise a new strategy. But what to do? We decided to use both engagement and pressure to present Iran's leaders with a hard choice of their own. Comply and reap the benefits of improved relations, or refuse and face increased isolation and ever more painful consequences. Now, none of us were under any illusions that Iran was going to change its behavior simply because a new administration was willing to talk again. But we believed that the effort of seeking engagement would actually strengthen our hand if Iran rejected our initiatives. The rest of the world would see that the Iranians were the intransigent ones, not us, and that would make them more likely to support increasing pressure on Tehran. Now, that is more or less what happened. Over the course of that first year, we extended an open hand, but Iran refused to unclench its fist. The world learned of secret Iranian nuclear facilities buried inside mountains and saw Iran reject every good faith offer to resolve the impasse. Not even Russia or China could deny what was going on as much as sometimes they would have liked to. So we went to the UN Security Council and proposed some of the toughest multilateral sanctions ever on record. I worked for months to round up the votes. It reminded me of the backroom negotiations in the Senate with all the horse trading, arm twisting, vote counting that go into passing any major legislation. In the end, we were successful. After years of division, the international community came together and sent a very strong, unified message to Iran. And then, building on the framework established by the United Nations Security Council, with the help of Congress, the Obama administration imposed some of the most stringent, crippling sanctions on top of the international ones, and so did our European partners. Our goal was to put so much financial pressure on Iran's leaders that they would have no choice but to come back to the negotiating table with a serious offer. We went after Iran's oil industry, banks, and weapons programs, enlisted insurance firms, shipping lines, energy companies, financial institutions, and others to cut Iran off from global commerce. Most of all, I made it my personal mission to convince the top consumers of Iran's oil to diversify their supplies and buy less from Tehran. That was no easy sell. Remember, this was taking place in the midst of the global economic slowdown. Europe in particular, particularly Southern Europe, was very dependent on Iranian energy, as were our friends from India to South Korea to Japan. There they were trying to work themselves out of a global economic slowdown. In Southern Europe, they were dealing with extreme austerity requirements, and yet they went along, and they signed on to this strategy. With each one who agreed, Iran's coffers took another big hit. Oil exports dropped by more than half, costing Iran billions in lost revenue. Inflation soared and the value of the Iranian currency collapsed. Tankers sat idle with no markets to visit, no foreign investors or insurance companies willing to back them. Inside Iran, an unprecedented debate took place, which culminated during the elections in the summer of 2013. People started questioning the wisdom of taking such a hard line on the nuclear program, and not just the usual so-called moderates. Conservative leaders with ties to the supreme leader did as well. Hassan Rouhani, a former nuclear negotiator, said publicly that all of Iran's problems stemmed from our crippling sanctions, and he called for a change of direction. He won in a landslide, and suddenly Iran was back at the table. I also was involved in creating a bilateral channel, which began to explore what was really possible if we were to enter into negotiations. And we revitalized the so-called P5+1 effort, which are the 5 permanent members of the Security Council plus Germany, under the leadership of Cathy Ashton, the High Representative for International Relations for the European Union. So when I left as secretary and passed the baton on to Secretary Kerry, we were positioned to really explore whether we had set the table well enough to see changes that were sufficient to meet our legitimate objections to Iran's behavior and its future plans. Secretary Kerry, working with an excellent team and with the P5+1, were able to secure a temporary halt in the progress of Iran's nuclear program in exchange for releasing some confiscated assets and easing ancillary sanctions. The meeting has resumed in Geneva. The goal now is to negotiate a comprehensive agreement that will resolve all of the international community's concerns. To get there, we will have to be tough, clear-eyed, and ready to walk away and increase the pressure if need be. No deal is better than a bad deal. And from my perspective, we cannot and should not accept any agreement that endangers Israel or our own national security. Now, it's worth noting that even if an agreement is reached, Iran's support for terrorism and its aggressive behavior in the region remains a threat to the United States and our allies. And we need to step up our efforts to confront and push back against these threats. Now, President Obama has said that the odds of reaching a comprehensive agreement are no more than 50-50. I personally am skeptical that the Iranians will follow through and deliver. I've seen many false hopes dashed over the years, but nonetheless, this is a promising development, and we need to test it to see what can be achieved. This is the time to give diplomacy space to work. If it does not, there will be opportunities to put in place additional sanctions in the future, with the important requirement that the international support necessary to ensure enforcement will be forthcoming. Because it is critical to this strategy that the United States push forward to test so that the rest of the world can see that is exactly what we said we would do, and we are doing it. And if there is no agreement, the onus is on the Iranians. And let's be clear, every option does remain on the table. We saw in the recent elections that Iranian citizens want a different future. The spirit that drove huge crowds into the streets of Tehran in 2009 to demand democracy and defy the theocrats is still alive. The question is, Will it once again be crushed by the hard men with guns, or will it persist and eventually succeed? Because ultimately, it is up to the Iranians themselves. They have to decide what kind of country they want to live in. That is a hard choice no one else can make for them. Is the country's nuclear program worth beggaring a proud people? If Iran had a nuclear weapon tomorrow, would that create even one more job for a country where millions of young people are out of work and out of hope? Would it send one more Iranian to college or rebuild crumbling roads and ports? Would Iranians rather end up like North Korea or South Korea? It is up to them to choose the future they want. If they choose to walk through an open door to a different future, we must be prepared to respond in kind, just as we must be prepared with firm resolve if they refuse. The next months will be telling. I believe we have laid the groundwork to test the Iranian leadership and to send a clear message to the Iranian people. We would welcome them back into the community of nations. We would be pleased to see them make different choices about their future. We can only do so much, and what we must do is always be prepared, hope for the best, prepare for the worst, as they say. But eventually, they themselves, leaders and people alike, must face this hard choice. Speaking of hard choices, let me turn to another. As you know, negotiations between Israel and the Palestinians have recently been suspended, despite intense and determined efforts. In the end, the parties were not ready to make the choices and compromises necessary to reach agreement on core issues. Now, myself, having worked, cajoled, and implored my way through 3 rounds of direct face-to-face negotiations between Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Abbas when I was Secretary of State, as well as having a front row seat to my husband's efforts in the 90s and as a senator to President Bush's efforts, I can tell you that hard choices are exactly what it will take to achieve a just and lasting peace, a comprehensive peace between Israelis and Palestinians, 2 states for 2 people. I don't think there is any great mystery about what a final peace deal might one day look like and the kind of broad agreements that would have to be struck in order to achieve that. The challenge remains mobilizing the political will on both sides to make those decisions necessary to accept justifiable, defensible compromises, building trust and confidence on both sides, helping leaders carve out political space to negotiate with each other, making a persuasive case that the status quo is unsustainable for both sides. The latest decision by Fatah to seek reconciliation with Hamas is obviously troubling. But I am reminded of something Itzhak Rabin once said. It was a blistering hot afternoon in 1994. He had come to the Arava Desert to meet King Hussein of Jordan and together sign a treaty to bring peace between those 2 nations. Leaders should clear the path, he said, should show the way, but the road itself must be paved by both peoples. As we move forward and walk the road ahead with so many questions to be answered and choices to be made, one constant will remain fixed, and that is the friendship and partnership between the United States and Israel. America's commitment to Israel's security will never waver. That is not a hard choice. In fact, in recent weeks and months, we've seen a resurgence of rockets fired from Gaza, the most since the conflict with Hamas in November 2012. I was involved in the negotiation of the ceasefire to end that very dangerous threat, and the ceasefire has thus far held. So have the Iron Dome batteries America helped to fund, but the threats remain. And while it is too soon to say what will emerge from the internal Palestinian political discussions, expectations of Hamas must remain the same. They must reject violence, honor previous agreements, and accept Israel's right to exist. If Hamas refuses to take these basic steps toward peace and legitimacy, then they will remain a pariah. So we must be vigilant. America will always have Israel's back through every up and down. That's what we do. That's who we are. When Americans of all faiths look at Israel, we see a homeland for a people long oppressed and a democracy that has had to defend itself at every turn. In Israel's story, we see our own, and the story of all people who struggle for freedom and the right to chart their own destinies. Israel is more than a country. It's a dream nurtured for generations and made real by men and women who refused to bow to the toughest of odds. I have been proud to do my part to keep our relationship rock solid over the years. I must say, as my book is published, you'll see more of the ways that I did that in the 4 years I served as secretary. The endless meetings, the vigorous discussions, even arguments, the endless phone calls. But it was always, for me, an important part of not just my responsibility, but my privilege to be a friend of Israel. And I have long admired the leadership and tireless advocacy of the American Jewish Committee to strengthen our ties and focus on our shared future, even as we honor our common history. For more than a century, AJC has been a voice for the aspirations of the Jewish people and for a secure and democratic Jewish homeland. You have fought for the core values that make America great: equality and religious freedom, civil rights and women's rights, a freer, fairer nation in which every child has the opportunity to live up to his or her God-given potential. So we have a lot of hard choices ahead, but I thank you. I thank you for everything you do for the United States, for Israel, and for peace-loving people everywhere. And I hope that as we continue the hard work of making hard choices, we will never lose sight of the values and interests that drive our country, that drive Israel, that drive democracies, because I believe the next decades will see a contest between those who claim that authoritarianism, whether it is personally generated, religiously generated, tribally or nationalistically or in any other way, is a better way to lead people into the 21st century than the messy, confusing, seemingly dysfunctional operation of democracies. Now, I would hasten to add, I would like to see our own democracy work a little more smoothly in order to set a better example and to deal with our own problems here at home. And I'm sure that a lot of Israelis often feel the same about the rather bare-knuckled form of democracy at work in Israel. But I wouldn't trade for 1 minute all of the frustrations and difficulties that democracy confronts in bringing people together to make hard choices. And I believe that model, whether it be the United States, Israel, or any of our other democratic allies, partners, and friends, will stand the test of time, so long as we are willing to make the hard choices to do so. Thank you all very much.